It's less and less so like that for me, where I'll sit down in sort of the traditional sense and pick up a guitar and write a song start to finish. Or, you know, it's like when I'm in a situation where I have like a piano at my fingertips, like it's fun. It's fun to try and write in all of these different ways. But for me, you know, I don't. So much of how I write is intertwined with recording to the point where it's, you know, like writing a song is synonymous with like sitting at my desk with all my stuff. So for the most part, yeah, it's like I'm much more of like a write as I record person.
There's a video on your, I guess it's called X Now account, that kind of walks through the process of, you know, laying down the tracks. And, and it strikes me that one specifically, and you say as much, that it's built around a specific breakbeat and then everything kind of comes from there. Yeah.
Well, yeah, that song in particular, I'm pretty sure you're talking about this song called Headlights On. I mean, that song is fairly, I mean, it's sort of like a dance track, both in the way that it's made and you know, roughly how it sounds. I mean, I don't, you know, it's like, I don't typically write a lot of music that's so like everything is that programmed out. I think about my own music in as like in the way that I imagine electronic musicians think about their music, where it's like, I'm always kind of, it's hard for me to escape the sort of like recording software as being kind of like where it all happens and where I'm building out the structures and you know, it can be kind of a negative thing to get trapped within this gridded out like way of looking at music. It's sort of unnatural, but it's also I find that it's fun to approach sort of like more traditional songwriting in that way, where you're kind of like able to sort of like pull things around and move them however you want, and it's like putting this jigsaw puzzle together.
That song in particular is an interesting example, and it's interesting to hear that it was built that way because of like what a deeply personal song it is.
Yeah. And I think that dichotomy was kind of what made me feel comfortable releasing a song like that, because I think if it was just purely like a pumped up party song or something, like it wouldn't have really
LMFAO.
Yeah. Then it just like it wouldn't have sat right with me. I think I was comfortable releasing a song that was a bit more of like, you know, borderline dance music, like body music, meant to be felt, meant to sort of, you know, get your head moving, but then also having these really personal lyrics about, you know, like sort of exposing this slightly uglier side of yourself, and sort of like exposing this, like being really honest about like having a really difficult time in my relationship, like immediately following having a kid, you know.
Those specific lyrics somehow came up organically through the process of putting the song together?
Well, you know, I think it started off with just kind of being like chance that I was starting to work on this song while also like going through this moment in time that I just sort of needed that catharsis of being able to write it down and put it somewhere so that it wasn't just like sitting in my head. and I think you know, and I've talked about it a little bit in other interviews that I've done, but I think I started realizing sort of the catharsis in putting it in a song like that was sort of more like, musically speaking, kind of like uplifting and upbeat, which, you know, it's like I'm not like reinventing the wheel here by like putting like various emotions together in one thing, but I think to me it's sort of like it kind of fit. Like it felt like a release on both sides in slightly different ways. You know, the sort of like really honest, earnest approach to just kind of getting my feelings out there, while also making this music that was almost kind of like, I don't know. Yeah, it's just sort of like meant to help you get through a hard time or something.
Earnest is an interesting word in this context, because it's one thing to be concerned about, you know, just putting something deeply personal in the world, but when you use the word earnest, it, you know, makes me think of times that I've tried to, or have created things and put them out or held them because they were too earnest, because, you know, you worry about sort of dipping over into the side of being like writing that like self-indulgent poem or something.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, totally. I feel like it's something that I'm conscious of a lot when I'm writing. And I don't know, I don't, it's maybe just an age thing. It's just like getting older. Maybe I just like care less. I'm a little less concerned with being cool. I don't really like, you know, I think things that I maybe would have reserved for myself, or kind of like made and walked back in a previous life, because I felt like, oh, well, this, you know, I'm less concerned about seeming corny or something. Like to me, I'm willing to take that risk of like just being really kind of like, you know, I think again, earnest. I think earnest is the right word for it, because it's a little bit more than honesty. It's sort of like not being afraid to just seem like uncool.
But in this instance, you alluded to this a little bit before, but in this instance, having, I guess, having music that's to a certain extent discordant with the lyrics, I think helps not deflect, but counteract from some of that.
Right. Yeah, which is, you know, it is interesting that clearly there's a part of me that is still like a little protective, because I do use these things, right? You know, it's like, it's not, I'm still probably not going to like put out a song that's like a very sort of like traditional ballad where I'm singing like, you know, I still need to find these ways to like deflect or to like skew what I'm doing. And I think, you know, part of it is protective, but then another part of it is just because like I like that. I like that in the music that I listen to, or like the movies that I watch or whatever, you know. It's like I always like when there's I enjoy things that have sort of like a mass appeal, but also still find a way to try and like do it thoughtfully and artfully. Because I think it's that's sort of like an art form in itself, of like not just making something that's purely for mass consumption, and not just making something that's purely self-expression and as weird as it wants to be. Like the things that find a way to sort of like meet in the middle in an effective way, I feel like those are the things that interest me the most.
I saw the new Scorsese movie last week, and I was thinking about how increasingly rare someone is like him is going to be, and how I am, you know, sympathetic to. There's been this whole thing, like, you know, Marvel movies. He shit talks some superhero movies, and it made a lot of people on the internet really upset. And I think that there's a parallel here, because I think that both of these industries, really anything that's creative now, is in the mainstream of things entirely ruled by algorithm. And that's what you're trying to avoid.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's like, I think there's still something to be said about like something that isn't driven by numbers, that like does come from a genuine place of like self-expression, but also like is sort of purposeful in its relatability.
That song, you know, I got stuck on that song because I was watching that video of you making it, and you know, there are there's a line in there that it's like, I don't even know. I'm probably paraphrasing, and I'm going to do an awful thing of sort of quoting it back to you.
That's okay.
But you say, why does it have to be, or why do I have to be so hard to love? And that was a gut punch for me, man. That's a tough line.
Yeah. It's, cause I think there's times where I've felt that I've felt like I purposefully put up barriers in my relationships and in my like really important relationships in my life. And it's like, it's so hard, I think, when you're going through life and you recognize certain like self-destructive tendencies, and not necessarily in the sense of like the things that you would normally think about, but just kind of like behaviors or thought processes that are sort of like self-defeating and make things harder for yourself. And it's just, and that you're doing them, and you're just kind of like, why do I do this? I think that's kind of like what that line was about, in that instance, specifically with sort of like the way that my wife and I's relationship changed after having a kid, and just sort of like knowing that things had to change and that our life was going to look a lot different, but still, as you're going through it, it's like, you can't help but be a little bit surprised, or like, I think there's a lot of things that we were naive about, like having a kid, which, is just like the normal growing pains of parenthood in general. But yeah.
I mean, what's an example of something that really blindsided you?
I mean, I think you're already quite dependent in a lot of ways on the people in your life that you're closest with, whether it's your partner or your parents or whoever. And I think I was a little maybe underprepared for sort of like how much we would really be relying on each other just to sort of like get through these things that previously were, just like your very normal day-to-day things, like things that used to be so easy are now difficult. And that's like, and whatever. It's like, I don't want to turn this into like a boring parenting podcast situation, but it's just like all these little things, just like getting out the door in the morning. It's like, it's hard. It takes much longer. And it's like these micro frustrations build. And I think you always, or at least I think we told ourselves that like, oh, like this stuff it's not going to phase us. It's not going to build up in the same way for us, because we felt that our relationship was so strong. And, it's like, and it's back to being in a strong place, but it took a lot of work. It took a lot of like, of work to get back there after having a kid, I think.
How does she react when you play her a song like this?
I mean, she's understanding about it, I think, and I certainly wouldn't feel as comfortable talking about this stuff if we didn't have these kinds of conversations like often. But yeah, it's like I'm sure it must be weird for her in the sense that like there's a lot of our life reflected back in the music, and so that's at once relatable, but also it's like it's my vantage point. But and this is about as deep as I'd be willing to go anyway, like about like my own personal life in the music is a song like Headlights On,
which is pretty personal, frankly.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I don't know. It's like, I think as I've gotten older, I just like, I don't know why I feel like less scared about like exploring these things that are sort of like bigger and deeper and normally scarier or something, of just sort of like,
I don't think that is unusual at all. And I'm certainly on one of a long list of people who had my reasons for not wanting to do therapy for a long time. Big one is that my mom's a therapist, which you'll find that a lot of people's parents are therapists, like it puts them off to it.
Sure, yeah.
But got pushed to that point because of the last, 3.5 years.
Yeah.
Just like living alone in New York, it was like, okay, well, at least like at very least I have somebody to talk to now. But
yeah, it was, I don't want to like harp on it for too long, but yeah, I mean, that definitely played such a huge part of it too, of just sort of like where my mindset has been over the past few years of like having a kid is already such a like a monumentous thing in your life, and we obviously like pulled so much joy out of the experience still, even under the circumstances, but like I think there's already a level of fear of like becoming a parent and sort of like the weight of that responsibility, but then like doubling that with like, oh, well, now I need to like wipe down all my groceries because like I might like pass along a deadly disease to my infant son. It's like, oh my God, like, and I feel like that sort of paranoia, like, frankly, took a long time to rid myself of.
What does your wife do?
I mean, she's done a number of things. She designed jewelry for a long time, and then more recently, she's been training to become a doula. Because our son's just like, that birth experience was really moving for her, and she's kind of like really, really gone deep on I think kind of like supporting women through that process. So that's what she's doing at the moment.
I ask because you have this very strange job that requires you most of the time, not requires you, but most days you're home. Like you're working from home. You're calling me from the studio right now. I certainly have had this issue with when I've lived with girlfriends before, of like tensions get really high when people are living on top of each other. And the pandemic like really put a lot of relationships to the test because you weren't leaving and there was just all the stress and everything else, but then you also have a job that requires you to just go out on the road and not be home for weeks at a time.
Yeah, and it's funny because I feel like that was something that was always like built into our relationship for years, and it was just sort of understood that I would be gone for like a month here, a month there. And it wasn't like there weren't occasionally problems because of it, but I think it was sort of like the nature of our relationship that we would get these breaks from each other that I think sort of like fueled the health of our relationship in a lot of ways, because we did sort of have these periods of sort of being able to kind of like go about our own business while still having each other. Yeah. So, I mean, of course, pandemic changed a lot about that too, but yeah, it'll be interesting. Like I'm going out on the road in a couple weeks here, and it's not a terribly long tour. I've sort of made the decision that I want to tour in a different way now that I'm a father, and like, and it's already like it's I feel like it's getting increasingly harder to tour, and like I don't know, I feel like there's so much talk in like the music industry these days about whether it's merch cuts or blah blah blah, and like ticket prices having to go up, and I mean like the whole mess of Ticketmaster and all this stuff. So it's like it's already a bit of a maze to navigate, but I'm feeling for sure like I want to try and find a way to do it in these shorter spurts so that I'm able to spend more time at home with the family. I
know it's the first record in 5 years, but have you toured in the intervening time?
Just a little bit, like we had a fairly large tour planned to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of our first record, and that was back in 2020. So that got, postponed a number of times, like everyone's tours did. And we did eventually do it. So that was good fun. And then, yeah, but nothing like super substantial. Mostly been home. Yeah.
No, I know you moved to Richmond. Was that a pandemic move?
It was before, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
So I've been here.
So really good timing on your part then.
Yeah. It was about, I guess I've been here like 5 years now. I moved to Richmond shortly. It was like around the same time that my last record came out, actually. But yeah, it was like a big shift for sure in terms of my lifestyle. And yeah, like I feel like I had a lot of mixed feelings about it over the years, but I'm now just like so thankful to be back in Virginia. It's like, I don't know. It's funny. All the places that I've lived, I never really felt settled. I never really, I don't know if it's like, yeah, it's just like there's some sort of like weird spiritual calling to me with Virginia, where it's just like, I just feel comfortable here in a way that I never really did anywhere else.
You were in LA previously?
I was, yeah.
I'm saying this as a New Yorker, but like, settled is a relative term when you live in a city that size.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I never, I think too, it's just, I didn't, when you're in your 20s and, I was living in New York for a long time, which was close enough to Virginia that I would still get to see my family like fairly often. But yeah, just, like my parents are still in Virginia. They're like an hour away in the same town where I grew up in Williamsburg. It's just like, it's been so meaningful.
You're from Colonial Williamsburg?
I am. Yeah. Yeah. Which I'm happy to talk about if you want. It's yeah.
That's all I want to talk about now.
Yeah. So presumably you've been then.
I haven't been. I know the. Well, I might have gone when I was really young.
Yeah.
I know, like,
yeah. It's like for most. I feel like for most people growing up on the East Coast, it is sort of like a mandatory either family vacation or school trip.
I'm actually from California.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Originally,
yeah.
but we did make a trip
it
out to like DC, so I think there's a reasonable chance that we went there as well.
Yeah, it's. I mean, yeah. What to
brilliant
say?
Question is what's it like? But yeah.
Well, it's. I did not appreciate it at all as a kid. Like I thought it. Of course,
when
thought
you're
it was
a
like
kid,
the most.
It's just normal. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, yeah, it was sort of like, oh, like doesn't everyone have like a part of town where there's like colonial garb and like horses pooping in the street? Like that's just normal, right? But yeah, it's like it's very much like there's the central part of town, which was the colonial part of town, and I want to say like I think it was like the Rockefellers or something that at some point like dumped a bunch of money into the restoration of colonial Williamsburg, and yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of, and Jamestown is just down the road, Yorktown. I just grew up around all of these like really sort of like important places in the American history textbook as far as like English settlement and colonialism. But so, I feel like my interest in it is higher now than it was when I was a kid. But yeah, it was funny, man. I mean, there's like a lot of weird things. Definitely like had a lot of friends that sort of like worked in Colonial Williamsburg.
Is that like a high school job?
For some people, yeah. Well, there was also like, there was this thing called the Fife and Drum Corps, which was basically like the program where like little kids would join and they would either learn how to play the fife or like, the like old timey marching snare drum. And then, they would do concerts and like march around Colonial Williamsburg, like playing old timey music. But like it had this crazy waiting list. So, you know, like people would sign up their kids when they were babies to like become part of this thing. And I think my parents signed me up, but I didn't. They didn't think in advance enough or something. But yeah, so it's like I knew some people that did that. The first job that I ever had, I worked at a Baskin Robbins that was in Colonial Williamsburg. And yeah, that was psychotic. It was just like, you know, it was just people out the door all day long, scooping ice cream for $5 an hour.
I'm thinking about I don't know if you remember the movie Cable Guy, but they go to medieval times and
yeah,
they don't have silverware, but they serve Pepsi. Like just the disconnect between working at a Baskin Robbins.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, you would just be like at the gas station somewhere in town, and then someone would like pull up in their Civic and get out wearing like full colonial garb because they just came from work or whatever. It's like a lot of that kind of stuff.
You know, you lived in the two biggest cities in the country. Did you like New York and LA?
Yeah, of course.
There's no of course. I've been living here for a long time now. I love it. I understand that a lot of people don't.
I like them both.
That a lot of people from smaller places
feel
out of place there.
Sometimes. I would never live in New York again. Just because, you know, like I don't feel like I could afford to live in New York in the way that I'm so used now to having like a little more room to breathe being in Richmond. Yeah, my personal experience was that I enjoyed living in Los Angeles a bit more because I think what it was is it just kind of came down to these like comforts of like my upbringing where like I grew up driving everywhere and you know, like going to like, I don't know, I just feel like there's a lot more like familiarity in Los Angeles where it's
if you like driving, you're gonna love LA.
Yeah, you can't just hop in your car and go to Target. Whereas like, you know, if you like need some basic necessity in New York, it's like a full day affair.
It either is a full day affair or it's like directly below you, you know?
Right. Yeah. True. Yeah, it's like some things are incredibly convenient in a way that like you can't get anywhere else, and then other things are wildly inconvenient. But yeah, I don't know. I have love for both.
Were these places that you moved specifically for your career?
I think so. I never really. I was not one of these people that grew up like with stars in my eyes, being like, I'm gonna move to the big city. I'm gonna move to New York. Like, you know, I went to New York maybe 3 times tops, like in my childhood, and it always just like scared the shit out of me. It didn't really like gel with my character and my personality. And, but you know, just as I got older, yeah. So I went to school at Virginia Tech, which is in like Western Virginia. And that's, you know, where I kind of like started making music more seriously, although I had always made music since I was a little kid. But, you know, I started working on my first record when I was in my senior year of college there. And then it got released, kind of took off a little bit. And I had a lot of friends that moved up to New York at that time. And I just wasn't mentally prepared. I don't know why. I couldn't do it. But I had some friends down in Savannah, Georgia, of all places, and so I moved there for a year, like immediately following college.
Very different place than New York.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Which I loved. I mean, I love Savannah as a city. It's so gorgeous and so unlike everywhere else in the United States. But you know, I was just like. Ultimately, I was just sort of like bored and lonely, and like I was touring so much that I was touring so much that I couldn't ever really like get a footing there. And then eventually, like my lease ran out, and I was like, okay, I'm just gonna do it. At that point, like all of the people I was working with were in New York. You know, I had enough friends up there that it was like it didn't feel like some scary thing of like moving to a new place where I didn't know anyone. So yeah, I did that and ended up, I was there for like 5 years.
How does the band thing work when you're living in entirely different places?
I mean, the band, like the Wild Nothing touring band has been pretty amorphous over the years, you know. And yeah, it's, you know, to me, it's so normal now that I don't even really question it. It doesn't seem that weird. I miss a lot of the things about, there's been times when we've all been in the same city, and that's been really nice, you know. It's like you can just very casually meet up to rehearse and all that stuff, but at this point now, it's like, it's fairly normal to me to be like, all right, I gotta like book flights for everyone, and you're all coming to Richmond, and we're gonna like rehearse before this tour. And like right now, you know, the band is split between people here, people in LA, drummers in New York. So yeah, it's just kind of like all over the place. I
noticed, you know, you've been doing some songwriting for other people, or at least your songs have appeared on other people's albums.
Yeah.
That seems like a very LA thing to me for some reason.
Yeah. Well, yeah, totally. And that did kind of start when I was living out there, because there is such a culture of sort of like collaborative songwriting and like songwriting sessions and this sort of like purposeful writing of songs that sort of like don't necessarily have a home, which it's an odd way to write music. It's, you know, I found it kind of fun. I think I never sort of had that approach of like looking down on sort of like the pop songwriting process. To me, it's just like a very different thing. It's like, I view it like as sort of like loosely self-expression, but it's more about kind of like that collaboration, and it's more about like problem solving or something. So it's sort of like a different approach that I thought was kind of fun. But anyway, I did end up getting set up through my publishing company on like a number of these like writing dates, if you will, most of which never work out because it's just like awkward getting in a room with someone you've never met before to be like, okay, you two boneheads write a song. It's like, oh, okay. But yeah, I was lucky in that a few of them did work out, and yeah, and it's like when it does work out, it's really rewarding, and I feel like I'm definitely interested in doing more of it, writing for other people, producing for other people. It's just like, I feel like it exercises a slightly different part of my musical brain in a way that's really kind of freeing, because I'm, as someone who works on and largely like produces their own music too, it's like I get so deep into it when it's my own thing, and I also, you know, like I'm much more careful, I'm much more, you know, it's like I do things at the risk of overthinking a lot of the time, because it's like there's
a perfectionist when it comes to your own stuff.
Perfectionist stuff, yeah, like perfectionist tendencies come out,
which is really easy to do when you're making it on a computer.
Oh yeah. It's just everything is like editable forever. But yeah, but like those things kind of fade away a little bit when I'm working on someone else's music, which isn't to say that I like don't put the same care or attention into it, but it's like there's always this thing in the back of your mind where it's like, well, like this isn't going to be mine.
They'll take it the rest of the way.
Yeah, or it's like, you know, if there's choices being made that suit their taste and like what they think is great, even if it's not like the way that I would do something, it's like it's so much easier to just let it go and just like enjoy the process of it.
I had sort of mentioned earlier when we were talking about algorithms, you know, how there is an extent, and I don't think this is true with all pop music, but, you know, you'll hear a song and you'll be like, well, that, you know, a computer helped someone write that, you know, like that was, you know, and there are ways in which people producing songs are, you know, effectively trying to game the system, and, you know, they feel like they know what works on the radio, but you feel like there's a way to enter this process and still really make it personal and invest yourself into something.
Yeah. I think there is. But I think too, like another thing that I sometimes really like about pop music is when there's a level of self-awareness. I feel like that's something that I like really enjoy about like Charlie XCX's music, for instance, where like that's like capital P pop music, but there's like, I feel like there's a real sort of like intellectual awareness about like what is happening and sort of like the way that it's being marketed that just like reads a little bit different than like some pop music where it does just feel kind of like it's like there's such a fine line sometimes. So it's hard to sort of like say why one thing might resonate with me whereas another thing doesn't. But yeah, I mean, you know, like honestly, I spend more time thinking about pop music than I do listening to pop music. if that makes sense.
It does, because I was thinking about that in the context of the way that you were describing both your own songwriting and songwriting with someone else. Use the word problem solving, and it seems to me like, I mean, obviously, there's a lot of heart and there's a lot of honesty in this music, but it seems like you have a very analytical approach when it comes to putting a song together.
Yeah, I think it comes from the way that I approach music from the very beginning, which is that, at 10 years old, my dad, who also plays guitar, I went to him and was just like, I think I want to learn how to play guitar. And so, he taught me a few things and then kind of just set me on my way to approach it in my own way, which I was really thankful for. But it was kind of clear to me immediately that like I didn't love playing guitar. I liked what it offered me, and I like the door that it suddenly opened, which in my mind was like, this thing is a means to an end, and the end is being able to record songs. Because it was like, I feel like I learned enough to like do the things that I wanted to do on guitar, but it was all sort of like in service of being able to write songs. And I feel like almost immediately it was like I was interested in songwriting because I liked seeing the way that all the instruments fit together. And it wasn't that I like would listen to a song and be like, oh man, like that guitar sound rips, or like it was always about like the whole. And I think because of that, I've always kind of approached music with both sides of my brain, where it's like it is a very sort of like creative thing and cathartic thing in terms of like, like giving a place for my emotions and giving a place to like create moods and like, but it's also, I'm so in love with the process, and it's like that is half the fun to me. Is like the engineering and production side of it.
It's interesting. There's a visual aspect to computer production that you don't get otherwise, and this seems to play into what you're talking about being able to actually like look at a track and being able to literally see how things fit together.
Yeah, and it's like, I feel like depending on someone's personality or the way that they personally approach or listen to music, it's like, I think for some people that might be sacrilege to think of music in that way, where it's like this visual thing where you're just seeing these layers stacked on top of one another instead of just like feeling it, but it's like, I've always felt that like you can do both. Like it's not, I think having like an analytical ear when you listen to music doesn't lessen sort of the emotional impact of something. And also, it's sort of interesting because I'm someone who like does really enjoy reading and really enjoys poetry and really enjoys when a song that I like or listen to has something lyrically that I find really affecting or really relatable. But I also listen to a ton of instrumental and like ambient music that I find or like sometimes even more like moving than, like storytelling music. And like, so to me, it's that like, that's the power of music is sort of like the ability to sort of like imply emotion as much as like telling you directly something.
It's a good point. I was watching some video of the band playing. I want to say it was Lollapalooza, maybe, or Pitchfork, or one of those sorts of festivals. And you were playing guitar. Is that standard for you in a live setting?
Yeah, it always has been. There's been occasions where I'll play keyboard, but yeah, I mean, still to this day, even though like I play a lot of different things, guitar will always be my first instrument, and so it's sort of like the thing that makes the most sense for me to play live. Like, I don't consider myself a proficient keyboard player. It's like I sort of have to stumble through things when I'm recording keyboard parts. Yeah, I mean, like, bass is my favorite instrument, but a lot of my bass lines are like fairly melodic, and so then it just becomes difficult to sing and play because you're keeping multiple melodies in your head at the same time with different timing, and it's just like complicated. But yeah, so guitar it is. That's sort of like my safe spot.
And there's also a dynamism to guitar that it's hard to replicate playing and singing keyboards.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know, it is a little bit funny sometimes, like when I'm teaching new band members parts of the song, because the way that I write songs is so much coming from that place of thinking of the song as a whole. And it's like, it's really my belief that like, as long as a part serves like the whole of the song, then it doesn't need to be a complicated thing. And it's like, there's occasionally parts where I'm having to like apologize to my bandmates. I'm just like, this is going to be really boring for you, because like your part sort of serves this very specific purpose that serves the rest of the song, but it's like it's not like an engaging thing in itself. Like, the parts are so reliant on the other parts in order for the song to work.
Once the song is written and recorded, that's how it exists in the world. How much freedom does your live band have?
I mean, I think we've always sort of taken the approach of trying to stay true to the recordings, if only at first, just because it's sort of like a necessary thing to do in order to kind of like initially approach the song. But I always find that the more we play them, and especially if we're doing a longer tour, that like these small liberties start being taken, and decisions about like, oh, maybe we move this part around, or maybe we won't play this part for as long, or we'll play this part for longer. Like, those decisions kind of like naturally grow out of playing together night after night. But yeah, it's like, I think because I do so much of the recording on my own, and it's like these records exist before they like are played in a room. It's sort of like it's sort of the only blueprint that exists for the songs. Which, like, I sometimes am jealous of like these like really sort of traditional bands where you've got like multiple people hashing out a song in a space before it's even recorded, because I think that leads to something special as well. But and I don't know if it's, I think it's like partially like an economic thing of like, I think it's just harder for bands to like approach music in that way, because it's just so expensive to tour and blah, 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 all this stuff. But like, I feel like you see less and less sort of like true collaborative bands where it's like you've got, 4 or 5 people kind of like contributing to something equally.
I've noticed in interviewing people that bands have also become much more geographically dispersed because they're able to. But it would be, and I'm sure you've thought about this, but it would be an interesting experiment for you to attempt to write an album in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I know. I feel like there's so many sort of like experiments in the process of like how to approach writing a song that I'm constantly flirting with or being like, oh, like I really should try that. And then it's just old habits always die hard, you know?
So this is your first fully self-produced album since the first one. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So the first record was like truly just did everything, you know, like, because I was just, you know, like recording songs regardless, and in my apartment in Blacksburg, Virginia, where I lived at the time. And it wasn't until I was sort of like halfway through the process of just like writing these songs that I like got a small deal to sort of like make and release the record. So it was kind of like, oh, well, I guess I'm making a record now. But yeah, there was zero budget. It didn't really even cross my mind that I would make it any other way. It was just sort of like, oh, I'm just going to like do everything on this. And then, you know, as things kind of took off and I had access to a lot more resources and all that stuff, it's like I kind of like got more and more into the idea of like pulling more people in and making records in a more traditional sense and like utilizing professional studio spaces and all that kind of stuff. But I've always like really enjoyed working alone, and I think it's just kind of gotten to the point where it's like my demos are more or less indistinguishable from like what the record would be anyway. So it's like, why put in all this effort into something just to like re-record it? So it's just like, now when I have a song that I know I kind of like, I'm just like, all right, I'm gonna record this. And, you know, I might occasionally replace things here or there, but it's like, it's always sort of a given from the get-go that like I'm going to be using some of, if not all of the things that I like record from this point on.
It's funny that you've actually become less collaborative over time.
I know. I'm a control freak. I'm a total control freak.
It works.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, it's, you know, music has always been sort of like this sort of solitary activity for me, which is sad because there's so much beauty in collaboration, and, you know, like, but like, I think to me that my feeling has always been like, oh, well, as soon as I like collaborate on this, it's no longer the same thing. It's like it would be something else. And I'm like fully open to that, but like, I don't know why I sort of like put up these like boundaries or definitions in my mind that like, for whatever reason, like in my mind, Wild Nothing is just this thing that I like hack at alone.
It's getting late, I'm tripping in the dark. My shirt draped over the moon. I'm just trying to